all of you. But as Dr. Tortorelli brings up the slideshow, I just wanted to let you know, or wanted to have you think about this particular situation. Have you ever been invited to a professional learning session that you're very excited about, and the facilitator has sent you an article or a chapter to read before the session, and you've read it and taken notes, and you're really excited to talk about it with your colleagues, and you get there and you're put in a group of 5 or 6 people, and it turns out that only 3 of you have read the article and the other 3 have not. And so the discussion that you have around that article is not as in-depth as it could be if all 6 of them had read the article. So you kind of do a surface discussion about the topic of the article. Or perhaps as a coach, you've been a facilitator of a session where you've sent out something and the people come into your professional learning session and only half of them have read the article, or 2/3 of them. So what do? Do you take time from your professional learning session to allow people to read it? And if that's the case, then the people who've already read it, what are they going to be doing? Or once again, do you just have a less in-depth conversation that you would like to have? So probably one of those 2 situations has arisen for you at some point in your teaching or coaching career. And so today, as we look at this particular article, focuses on Essential 3, we really wanted to share with you a paragraph study protocol that may mitigate some of those issues that I talked about earlier. We want you to go through the protocol, and then at the end, we'll reflect on why you might or might not want to use a paragraph study. So Dr. Tortorelli is going to lead you through the paragraph study, and then we'll have a short discussion about its advantages and maybe some of the problems that you would have implementing a paragraph study. So Dr. Tortorelli, take it away.
Thank you so much. That situation you're describing is also very familiar to me as a college instructor of our future teachers. So this is something that that I'm always having that same quandary in my classes. So I'm very excited to practice this protocol with all of you and take it into my classes next year. We wanted to highlight this particular article for a few, as our example, for a couple of different reasons. And one is that the way that it connects to the literacy essentials in terms of thinking about the end goal of any instructional activity, resource, or a routine that we bring into the classroom, and connecting, and particularly thinking about the purpose, our core commitments, and the robust resources that are integral to the instructional practices. And this article is particularly about something that I think a lot of different I'll go back one more slide here. A lot of different districts are dealing with right now, and helping my local school district work with this particular movement was really eye-opening for me. And this article captures a lot of those things. So it's about thinking about what small group work really should look like. We did a deeper dive into small group instruction with Tanya Wright a couple of sessions ago, and we were really talking about the various all the different things the ways of creating the groups, the different goals for that group work, the different things that can be accomplished in that group work, right? And what the research shows about the best ways to organize that time and use it for differentiation. And you'll see right there in the bullet, in the essential, that students are supposed to be observed and assessed and grouped by their specific needs and literacy, not by ability or level, right? That's written right into the text. And then, but what I find is that it's hard to read those words and interpret them if you have grown up in a system, like as a teacher, with a particular way of thinking about differentiation, right? If everything that you have done and everything you've been trained to do and everything that your mentor teachers did really was about matching kids to book level, right? Which is a level, it's what, a type of leveling. it's not so easy to just see a parenthetical and like move past that thing. And so what I found was it was really important to actually talk when we were trying to move on to a different way of grouping and differentiating in my local school district here. It was really important to talk to teachers and about what was meaningful for them and what they saw as positive and good about the way they had done it before moving on to something else. And so something I love about this article is that Sharon really models throughout the article the emotional journey that many teachers have to take, and with a lot of empathy, to move on past grouping by ability or book level into a different way of differentiation. And another bullet point from the school-wide essentials that I think is really important to think about here is the collaboration with families, caregivers, and community in promoting literacy. Because one of the things that teachers would tell me about why they were having a hard time with the shift was that it meant something to them to be able to hand a kid a book that they knew they could read. We'll talk about whether, we'll dig into that claim a little bit, the evidence behind that claim a little bit more as we go, but like that was meant a lot to them to be like, I can give this book to a child and I know they'll be successful reading it right from the beginning of school. But that meant a lot to them to be able to send that home, to send those books home and be like, these are the perfect books. They're going to be able to read them to their parents. The parents will see how great they're doing. They saw that as part of their family and community engagement as well. And it's really important to understand and value that and figure out how to replace it if we want to de-implement things that have been so important. And it is important to de-implement. I have also been in classrooms where, they're doing like really high quality, science of reading and, phonics instruction over here, and then immediately going back to small groups where they're following, guided reading. And the two things it's not even that one is good and one is bad, but they don't even match, right? The things that are happening in the phonics block have no correspondence to the things that are happening in the rest of the classroom. And so it's really important to de-implement as well as implement new things so that kids aren't getting conflicting messages and teachers aren't getting overwhelmed. But it's also important to de-implement with empathy and understanding for what those practices meant to the teachers. And I feel like this article that came out in the Reading Teacher fairly recently captures this really beautifully. As some of you may know, I was an associate editor of the Reading Teacher for the last 4 years. We've just rotated off, me and Dr. Wright and Dr. Edwards and the rest of the team. So we are no longer in charge of what's coming out. But one of the things that Dr. Edwards and Dr. Wright really did a great job at was recruiting really big names in the field to write for the Reading Teacher. As some of you may know that professors are primarily rewarded for publishing in research-focused journals rather than writing for things that teachers can use on Monday, as Dr. Edwards always says. And so they made a very concerted effort to recruit people who, Dr. Welpel always writes well for teachers, but sometimes people who hadn't been writing for teachers as part of their regular practice, such as Dr. Airy and several other big names in the field, to write what we called viewpoint pieces. And viewpoint pieces are not peer-reviewed. They were invited pieces where we asked big names in the field to express what they think about current issues. So this is not necessarily original, if you see a viewpoint at the top of one of these, it's not necessarily original research, but it is a researcher's perspective on the field and gave them a space to talk a little bit more in depth in something that they've been thinking about that they would like to see changed. So that's what this article is about. Or this type of article. So the articles, we're only going to dive deeply into 3 paragraphs, but the article starts out, sorry, this is a little, but by describing sort of the current landscape and why Dr. Walpole thinks now is a good time to think about to rethink the small group differentiation time. And she says that we've returned to normal. We have our kids in our rooms again and our buildings back post-COVID, but many students have unmet needs. Either as a result of COVID or other types of things that have been happening, and then particularly the students who depend on schools to learn to read, right? Kids who did not get outside help or did not have access to outside resources during the pandemic. So we have a lot of work to do, and kids they're kind of all over the place. And I hear this from teachers too. I'm sure you're hearing from it too. They're all over the place in where they, in what those needs are. So now's a really good time to dig in and make sure our differentiation is flexible and can meet those needs. But at the same time, she says we're under, the whole practice of teaching and teacher preparation and public education is under fire for how we've been teaching reading, including higher ed and how we're prepping teachers, but also schools and how they're teaching reading. And so she has table 1 here where she lists some of the many organizations or advocating for change in the teaching of reading. And then she talks about the legislation and how I think it's 32 states nationwide now have passed legislation advocating for one or more of these things, often including funding, which is good, but like mandating or, standardizing evidence-based core instruction, access to resources at home, high quality pre and in-service experiences for teachers, valid and reliable assessment systems, site-based support and leadership through literacy coaches and reading specialists. Yay, that's all of you. And in some cases, access to high-dose tutoring. And whenever I talk to people in other states, I always like to tell them that like we've been doing the science of reading for a long time, right? We had our moment of reckoning earlier, and we have a lot of these things already in place in many places. So we're at an advantage in Michigan in some ways, particularly around the site-based support and the valid and reliable assessment systems. We had a lot of that legislation as part of our Read by Grade 3 law, but she kind of talks about the national landscape here. And so then she dives into what changes she thinks are needed in response to that national landscape. So we're going to go through here and read 3 paragraphs. You're going to read a paragraph, and then there's going to be a poll. And I don't actually know how to make the polls work, so hopefully someone else is going to be opening those polls.
I'll do that for you, Laura. No worries.
And are they going to get one question at a time, or do they need to? Okay.
Yes. Yep.
So we'll read one paragraph from each that we've selected paragraphs that we think capture some key things that are worth discussing. So you're going to read the paragraph, respond to the poll, and then we'll take a few minutes to look at the results before we move on to the next paragraph. Is that did I get that right? All right. So we'll start with paragraph 1. This is from page 1. It comes right after the 2 paragraphs I just summarized.
If you are someone that happened to put other for your reasoning here, we do invite you to just put in the chat what's coming to mind when you hear the term science of reading. You can feel free to start sharing some thoughts though, Laura, if you'd like to, about what you're noticing.
Yeah, well, I know Aaron, Annie, and Susan all picked and discussed this article, the paragraphs, as part of developing the protocol. So if you want to jump in and add anything, please feel free. But what I love about the way this article opens actually is about how it takes sort of an uncomplicated, positive view of her definition of SOR, right? So she's just saying, like, of course, there is a scientific body of research, and we're going to try to use it in schools, right? Like, there's a lot of debate and argumentation around what this term means, but she does not engage in that. She goes right. She's like, of course, we're going to try to do this better. But I think that I really love this poll question because it really gets to the idea that that's not true everywhere, right? Like there's not always a shared understanding of what this means. It looks like about 50% of you say that there's not a shared understanding in the districts where you work of what this term means, but like what this means in practice between administrators and teachers. And more than 50% of you say that that this is taking on in some parts of the literacy instruction, but not all, or that there are mismatches between different parts of the curriculum. And as I said, I've seen that too, right? We are adopting one thing that we think is better aligned to what we know from research, but other things still linger, right? And in some ways, sometimes that's because teachers need permission to move on from something that they might feel like they're supposed to add and add and add, right? So de-implementation is a big part of this, but also sometimes it's for emotional reasons, right? And that's what the next part of the article really engages nicely. And then about a quarter of you said schools are adopting curricular resources because they are labeled SOR, but they're actually, we haven't really looked under the hood, and we're not exactly sure whether or not those are going to meet the needs of our students. And I think that's a really important thing to add as well. Let me take a look in the chat. Let's see here. I might not be seeing the right chat. Hold on. There we go. When I hear SOR. Yes, all right. I'm thinking about the specific practices like that teachers need to not just hear, what I'm seeing in the chat is that teachers need to not just hear science of reading, they need specific practices and support implementing those specific practices. And of course, that's what the essentials do, and that's what we are here to work on, but that work is not just one and done, right? That is something that is ongoing in our work, being specific and naming practices. So I really like how positive this opening paragraph is, because it, she's like, if we can get all these things aligned to research and going together, then we can, good things may happen for teachers and for students, but we can't wait, right? What can we be doing right now to improve and meet the needs of our students? Should we share the results? Should we share them out, or I was just, or verbally summarizing them?
Show for all, I thought I shared them.
There you go. Maybe you already did. Okay, great. Let's move on to our next paragraph.
Okay. And I'll put the poll right in, and when we launch that, and then we're gonna have 3 minutes for this part, so we can make sure you get all your things.
Okay, great. So this next paragraph is under a title that says, what questions have researchers asked about guided reading?
As a quick note, though we think you might have several pieces of this that you would answer, like you may select several of these, the way the poll is set up, it's not really allowing you to do that. So hopefully you're choosing the one that stands out to you most, but there may be several choices that you would have picked. Okay. Yes, you're sure. Great. All right. Well, it's that you can see the results here. It seems, and I wanted to, even though these were not the most surprising results, I did want to highlight the 2 findings about the informal reading inventories at the beginning, the two choices, even though those are lower down, because that's something that is a real opportunity for de-implementation. There are many districts that I work with where they have new assessments that they're doing, like they've added in a cadence or dibbles or something like that, that they do see as more science of reading aligned, but they don't want to give up their informal reading inventory because they feel like they learned so much, that's something that they learn about the students, and they can find out their reading levels, and like that's something that they're used to administering as part of their get to know you protocols at the beginning of the year. And in fact, those take up so much time that I think it's really important to think about what else could be done with that time. It's always great to listen to kids read. I highly recommend listening to kids read, but an IRI procedure where you have to sit and listen to kids read multiple passages at different levels is not necessarily going to provide you with as much information as another assessment. A colleague of mine, Adria Chuckenmiller, did a recent study trying to compare just the cost and accuracy in both time and money of different assessments, and really found that IRI procedures take up so much classroom time that could be used for other things. So that's something that's just important to think about. I think a lot of people are holding on to those because they're like, well, what's the harm? It's always great to listen to kids read, and that's true. But it really is quite a big cost in terms of a student and teacher time to administer these, and they are not reliable. They don't give you actionable intelligence the way some other assessments do. I see there's more surprise that there's little empirical evidence that matching readers and text improves reading. And then there's a lot of surprise. About 50% of you around, there's no statistically significant difference in fluency and comprehension between readers who are instructed using instructional or frustration level texts. And I want to talk about both of those because I think there's actually a confusion sometimes between those two things. When you put a kid in front of a leveled text, it's often a predictable text. There's often a really strong picture match to the content. And so they sometimes look like better readers, right? It feels like they're reading more fluently or accurately in the moment. But it's important to know that they are not necessarily, spending more time doing that kind of reading over time,
there's no evidence that that would improve their reading, right? So it's about how, like, I often tell my beginning teachers that there's going to be a period of time that looks really awful, right? When kids are like stopping and sounding out each word and it seems really painful. And we want to like rush kids through that and avoid that conflict and that pain, like that struggle. But in fact, there's no evidence that like putting them in a book that will reduce that struggle is going to help their reading over time. And so I think it's important to note that like what teachers see in front of them, which is that kids appear to be reading more comfortably in a level text or a predictable text is true. The findings are about the long-term benefits or not of those of that practice. So there's no evidence that they're going to improve their reading that they're going to improve their reading skills by reading texts at their level. And there's definitely no evidence that they will that doing that frequently or having instruction built around their text level will improve their reading skills over time. And so that's something that's important to distinguish for teachers. And then I skipped over this one, but I want to come back. Level text designed for guided reading do not develop transferable decoding and word recognition skills. I wanted to come back to that last because that's the reason that we don't see that putting kids in level text or matching kids to their reading levels won't improve their reading over time. And it's because they are using other systems to recognize words and get through the text rather than putting all of that phonics and word recognition and alphabet instruction that they're getting into practice in reading. And so this is the point for which Sharon actually cites a study that I did. So if you don't mind, I'll go to the next slide. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what that study found. Freddie Hebert and I looked at 510 level texts from 3 different curricular programs, and we analyzed them for how hard the words were to decode, how hard the vocabulary was, how hard the syntax was, and the text structure. So text structure being like repetitive or predictable text structures. And then we looked at how they changed from level A to level J. So from the beginning of kindergarten to the end of 1st grade. And this is the trajectory for those 4 variables measured using the Lexile early reading indicators. And what we found was that decoding started halfway up the scale. This is a 5-point scale. So even at level A, which is the very first book they're supposed to be reading, decoding is already like halfway as hard as you can get. So decoding is not really controlled in these texts at all. And you'll see that it goes up to level C, but then level D is actually easier to code than level A, and then it kind of goes up again. And what we found was that there was no significant difference in decodability between level J and level A texts. So decodability is just not something that's going to help them. Like decoding skills is not something that's going to help them read these books. So they have to fall back on other things such as like pictures and syntax and their repetition in the story to make their way through these books. And that doesn't mean they can't have a good time with them. It doesn't mean they can't learn things from these books or like enjoy, use them as mentor text for writing or other things. But it does mean that they won't be practicing their decoding skills and putting them into practice, and it will not reinforce the things that they're doing in their phonics lesson. And so that's the reason, in my opinion, why we're not seeing that this is a really beneficial thing for kids over time. If one of my favorite we actually were able to do dominance analysis to see what text variable was the strongest predictor of what level a text was assigned to. And it was actually just how long the book was in words. No linguistic features at all, just how many words were in the book is the strongest predictor of what level of text a book is assigned to. So basically, there's a good reason that we wouldn't expect to see a lot of reading growth from level texts. All right, and we're on to the 3rd paragraph here.
Which I think I'm going to interrupt you, Laura, and say we have run out of time. If we want to stay on time.
I'm sorry, we moved too slowly.
Well,
yes.
One of my colleagues
we'll
always
save this
said,
for later.
You have to talk fast and listen fast, right?
Yes.
But I did want to spend just a couple of minutes here to talk about the benefits and some of the obstacles of a paragraph study.
Yes.
So if there would be a couple of people who would be willing to put what they think are some benefits and or how is facilitating a paragraph study different from facilitating an article study, and when might you use this practice? So even though you only saw 2 paragraphs, the third one was the same, where you'd read a paragraph and answer a question. Now, we did it electronically with a poll question, but you could do it paper and pencil as well if you were meeting side to side. And I think that we will be able to get you the questions. So if you wanted to do a similar paragraph study, you would be able to. So Lydia says it's very structured and that there's some common language and learning going on. It focuses the learning points, and that is really important. I think that as a facilitator, it does take more time for you to get organized because you have to choose the paragraphs that are most meaningful for the purpose of what you're discussing that day. And you have to come up with really important questions that will get people thinking about that paragraph. And as somebody said earlier, I think it was Michelle said, you know, I know these aren't surprising, but I don't know how to communicate them. And I just wrote that really the whole following section gives some support for the ideas around guided reading and things like that. And that will help your participants or encourage them to read the whole article because they've read this snippet and now they want to see some of the details. It was a good tease to read the whole article, Ashley says. Well, we're thinking on the same brain. And it builds interest. Everyone's engaged. Everybody is reading the same thing. So I think you're absolutely right in some of the benefits. You as a facilitator have to just know that it's going to take a little bit more planning on your part in terms of selecting the paragraphs, the poll questions, and thinking about what you're going to say after the poll has been shared. The other thing, as we even encountered, and we had it timed out, time can escape if people spend too much time talking about one point or the other. And so you might not get to all your paragraphs, but you at least have everything prepared for the time you have scheduled out. So this might be something that you would be interested in trying with an article during a short professional learning session that you have with teachers. And I think that it really helps when you are working with very busy teachers who have the best of intentions to read that article before tomorrow, but oh, I have to plan this lesson and I have to get this done, and they just don't get to it. So it doesn't put the onus on the teachers to do something before the professional learning session, but that they can benefit from it during the professional learning session. So we hope you maybe think about trying this with one of the professional learning sessions that you give toward the end of the year or next fall.